Welcome back, everyone. Now it's time for the most energetic part of our event, where we have three experts discuss how to evaluate and select next-generation data catalog tools. So please submit your questions, and we'll try to incorporate them during the discussion. Wayne, over to you as panel moderator.
Great. So the first data catalog, as I mentioned, was shipped in about 2015, so almost a decade ago. And since then, data catalogs have become the de facto glue for metadata and a must-have product for every organization that takes data management seriously. But as we've seen, a lot has changed in the past 8 years. Today's data catalogs are very different than their predecessors. So here with me to explore those changes and help you make good product decisions or validate the products you've purchased are three distinguished panelists. Brian Jacob, CTO and founder of Data.World, Louis Wynne-Jones, VP of Product at Think DataWorks, and Casey Lai, CEO of Prometheum. Their companies have each reimagined what a data catalog is and what it should do. So we're really glad to have these three vendors of all the data catalog vendors out there with us today. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Let's start with Brian here. So Brian, historically, data catalogs ran on-premises and cataloged on-premises data. Is it safe to say that today a data catalog should run natively in the cloud?
Yeah, I think so. I think, at this point, cloud-based SaaS is really the best way to kind of just deliver at the pace of innovation that you need to in this rapidly changing market. You can't shrink wrap and deliver a piece of software once or twice or maybe 3 or 4 times a year at the most and really keep up with the pace of how things are changing. Also, anyone with any kind of substantial data estate that you're trying to catalog is hybrid. You are hybrid. You're going to be hybrid. Maybe you're very modern and you're completely in the cloud. That's great. Then obviously your catalog should be there. But if you're in any kind of state of transition from on-prem to a more modern world, you're going to be hybrid. And so you want to have your catalog deployed in the cloud. You obviously need to be able to have connectors and tendrils that can reach into that on-prem data estate that's going to exist for some period of time and connect to it. But you really want the core of that technology that can innovate quickly to be cloud-based SaaS.
Yeah, and I should also ask, kind of as a corollary, you were one of the first vendors to implement a data catalog on graph technology. Is that also a requirement these days?
I mean, at the end of the day, cataloging is about collecting metadata, about enriching metadata. Metadata is fundamentally a graph, right? Whether you implement it on a graph database or not, it is a graph. Logically, you ultimately, and when you do implement it on top of a graph database, you really then you're able to then unlock the true potential of the metadata because you can now treat it as a graph. Its graph nature is a first-class citizen, and you can enrich. Something you talked about in your keynote. You really want to differentiate the physical metadata, the structure of what things exist that are part of your data state from the business metadata, where I would also call maybe the logical metadata. And thinking about that metadata as a graph lets you kind of naturally make that transition from you do have to. It is important to know what databases exist and what tables and columns and things like that exist in them. That's all really important information. But what you really want to do is derive the logical business level metadata from that about what the data are actually about. And so we think building it on top of graph technology is a really important thing because it lets you treat the data really closest to its true nature.
Yeah, so it really helps in the discovery phase.
Yeah.
Louis, to you, historically a data catalog indexed just really structured data from core systems. Today, what kinds of things should a data catalog realistically index besides the structured data?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point and a good question. You said in your keynote, we're in the age of metadata, right? And metadata is a much wider umbrella than structured data. And I think that the other point is that sort of the internal systems that originally data catalog supported were really like the legacy systems that IT teams were using. And data is much more diffuse now throughout the enterprise. And as people are shifting both migrating to the cloud and then migrating back, which is what we're seeing now, you're creating more and more sort of data sources, which is makes creating a source of truth for all of that data, or at least an observation layer for all that data, more complex. So really the way that we think of a data catalog is it's not just sort of the core systems and the legacy ERPs and all that stuff. It's everything that's being generated on a daily basis, being virtualized up into the catalog to enable that discoverability and use by everyone. And that's sort of the critical component that I think you were sort of talking a lot about. And I think that the other panelists and I agree on, which is that it's not just for IT systems, it's for business users as well.
So would that include reports and dashboards, schema, ML models? Would you include those things? And even unstructured stuff like videos and audio?
I do, and I think that the thing that we want to bear in mind is a data catalog is not a document management system, but it can also include that non-structured data under its umbrella. I think that with structured data, you have a host of things that you want to be mindful of: the health of the data over time, how the schema changes, how that's going to impact downstream models, and you can get all that sort of thing through lineage. But I think that it's also critically important for a data catalog to be able to manage the metadata of non-tabular data, of video files and things like that, just more than anything, so that you do have the central source of truth and then can connect it to models and trace the lineage and sort of graph it through its life cycle.
Excellent. All right, Casey, how is AI changing what data catalogs can do? That's a big question.
Yeah, my gosh, how much time do you have? No, I think we've seen kind of like two shifts recently with AI. One is obviously, I think with natural language, it's becoming, I think OpenAI was the first app that got like 100 million users in the first month. I mean, if you were a product manager, you want to study kind of like which product has the best UX, I think, that's a metric that said it won. And so I think, that's where, I think we definitely saw that natural language is something that is very conducive to data discovery, right? Which is a core tenet of data catalog. And so I think having the ability to support natural language search, natural language processing is super important. And so catalogs have to start adopting that way. I think we talked a lot in the chat about how do you get business people on board. Catalogs tend to be more IT-centric projects. You talk a lot about complex UIs. I see these all as symptoms, right? Like the root cause is like business users, they are more familiar with sort of an interactive approach to data discovery, right? So I think that's where AI has definitely made a change to data catalogs by introducing NLP search. The other aspect where I think data catalogs have changed because of AI, using generative AI to kind of do a lot of the grunt work, as I like to call it, the stuff that nobody really enjoys doing, but everyone knows. We all have that one customer who complained that they spent 3 months annotating or tagging something, like, way too much time doing that. And that's where you can use generative AI to actually automate a lot of these tasks, right? May not be 100% right out of the box, but if it did it for you in 5 minutes, it's not the worst thing in the world either, right? And so this is where I think it actually has changed the way that we think about curation, the way we think about annotation, which obviously goes hand in hand with data catalogs. So I think those two areas have actually made a big impact in kind of the discovery as well as the annotation layer. And then the third layer where AI has actually helped is actually in the reasoning, the logic, right? In terms of being able to figure out, well, if I have multiple tables and multiple columns, the same name, which one do I pick? I think that's where, we've done the legwork, right, of profiling, of crowdsourcing, et cetera, in the catalogs in the previous generation. And now with AIs, they can do that, build on that foundation and do that at scale much faster, and be able to just return the results and return the suggestions for you. So I think all that actually can really lend to a far better experience, right, than traditional data catalogs have been. So we're super excited that the age of AI has definitely come in and is here to stay, and is going to change data catalogs forever going forward.
Right. Now, you've been using AI from the get-go, even before ChatGPT came to fore, right?
Yes.
For natural language search. Are you going to use LLM for that, or more for like auto filling out descriptions and column names?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So, for anyone who's played around with LLMs last 3 months, I think, yeah, like everyone would say like it's super impressive, it's super fast, but I think anyone who is really deep into data will also notice that it may not be accurate, it may not be consistent all the time. I see Brian smiling there. That's where I think it's actually a nice pairing, right? So when we first, applied LLMs, we're like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then by the third time, like, why did I get two different answers for the same question that I asked within 5 minutes? That's kind of odd, right? What we realized was that for complex tasks where you're going to translate a question into a query, LLMs aren't quite there yet. They can do some basic suggestions of syntaxes, but again, it doesn't have a catalog, so it's not going to know the exact table name, the exact column name, and it's not going to know like the fully qualified names or which is the better one to pick. And that's where I think like something like Prometheum actually does a better job at relevancy, right? If I could sum it up, relevancy and accuracy. But again, going back to what I said earlier, the grunt work, like, hey, if I have this, weird SAP table with like, 85 esoteric SAP column names, right? That's where I can click a button and generative AI can actually automatically tell you, right? This is what MATNR means. This is what MAKT means. That's really useful, right? That's the type of stuff that I think you can apply generative AI in, and we do to really kind of kickstart that process. And, going back to discussions in the chat earlier, I think those are some of the things that make it easy for a business user, right? To be able to just see and go, okay, now I understand the data. I'm not intimidated. But if you want accuracy and relevancy within your domain, I think that's where, you still need, a domain-specific catalog, right? Which is what people implement in their environment, right? Plus their knowledge and their history of, what to pick, how to pick, and how to assemble. And AI can help with some of the syntax suggestions. I don't think generative AI is fully there yet for some of the complex tasks, like answering sophisticated queries through natural language. Thankfully, that keeps us in business for a while.
Brian and Lewis, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I was nodding when Casey was talking, just back to your comment previously around metadata is king, ultimately, large language model, generative AI, it's not a system for storing factual information. It deceptively seems like it is, right? You can go ask ChatGPT lots of questions. You can get lots of factually accurate questions, but responses to those. But really, what it's doing 100% of the time is statistically predicting the next set of words. And so it'll, we talk about hallucinations, but that's really just statistically the next likely word is this answer that I'll give you just as confidently as a real fact. And so, really, doubling down a lot of what KC said, I think the way to think about it is these technologies are really complementary. And training generative AI, at least current generation generative AI, there are some things that could change some of the dimensions. This is changing super quickly, but training it on data and using that as a way to retrieve facts is a terrible way to abuse the technology. Training it on metadata to teach it how to go consult structured, governed sources of information is actually really where you get true business value and real business applications out of generative AI. So you need a data catalog. You need to really strongly understand your metadata to effectively use LLMs to achieve real business goals.
Lewis, I'll give you the last word on generative AI if you want it.
It's great to be in a panel with a bunch of people who agree about this, because often you'll talk to people and people will just say, yeah, AI is going to solve all of our problems. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it's not a panacea, and I think that it is as good as the data that is training it, and the data that is training it is often horrendously flawed, which is why management comes before AI in the sort of scope of the hierarchy of needs. So I think that it's really, really exciting. I think that there's a lot there, but I remember 10 years ago when we were talking about AI solving everyone's problems, and it didn't do it then. So I think that people are treating it with a healthy regard and knowing what goes into making it work well. And there's a few companies, I think Prometheum is one of them, that's really treating it the right way. I think that too many people are slapping it as a sticker on what they do and not necessarily focused on the actual nuts and bolts of what will make it successful.
Wait, Wayne, before we go, just one thing, I think we forgot to mention security. right? Security is super important when you talk about generative AI, especially about LLMs. You've heard about the Samsung developers uploading their code right into OpenAI. Right? This is one of the things that I think is actually pretty cool about data catalogs is it's much safer to just give metadata, right, to OpenAI, to LLMs, as opposed to giving data. And so I think that's actually where there is actually a huge advantage in having data catalogs, in that you don't violate any security risk, because you don't have to actually send physical data, right, to your LLMs. But by giving the right metadata and leveraging parts of the capability of generative AI, you can actually still derive the right answers. That, I think, is not only an edge in accuracy and relevancy on discovery, but it's a big win for the security folks as well.
Let's go back to the adoption question from the keynote. And Brian, I'm going to start with you. Why do you think companies have trouble getting adoption for their data catalogs?
One of the biggest hurdles to adoption is something you really focused on in the keynote. So I'm going to kind of double down on that, just the technical versus business users, and really kind of understanding both those personas. I think, how we think about it is, I think it's really important. You actually have to serve both those personas, right? You do absolutely have to have an experience that's focused on the end business user, gets them directly to things based on business understanding, logical understanding, true kind of getting me to value without having to know the nuts and bolts details. That's incredibly important. But you also have to have a focus on the experience of the technical folks, because despite the fact that we're going to increasingly use LLMs and generative AI and AI of all sorts help us automate more of those tasks, those technical folks still are the ones who are actually providing a lot of leverage to the rest of those users. They have to be able to get in the platform and participate in the process of governing, curating, understanding, improving that data. So I think the hardest part of adoption is getting that mix exactly right, realizing that you're not just serving one persona, and so you can't just have a one size fits all
Right.
people approach the platform and use it.
So when you say technical folks, Brian, are you talking about data stewards or IT folks?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because that further subdivides there, right? You have folks like data stewards and governance teams more broadly, who are maybe not technical in the sense of digging in and writing SQL, but are absolutely thinking about nuts and bolts, fine grained, structured metadata that's subject to compliance regimes and all the kind of the complicated details of governing that data. And then you do have the folks like the IT folks, the DBAs, the engineers, the product managers, things who are folks who are getting involved with the data at that level. You can roughly break it into business users who don't want to deal with any of that, and the more technical group who are dealing with those things. We actually do further kind of subdivide the personas into really, how do we think about, how does the IT team who's setting up the automated metadata collectors and connecting to all the various systems and bringing their knowledge into the system work with it? How do governance teams who are actually participating in ongoing governance as a part of their daily activity? And then how do the end users, who are really just there to get max value out of the system, how do each of those groups want to come to and approach the system? And the way they see it when they hit that front door needs to be different, needs to actually respect the fact that what they're coming there to do are very different use cases.
So should support a lot of personas, which means you have to have good access control, right?
Yeah.
And role-based management.
Yes.
Good. So see, you're a clever guy. Do you have any tricks for getting people to adopt the data catalog?
Tricks. Yeah. I mean, look, I think I'll answer this by kind of dovetailing off of what Brian was talking about earlier. I think one of the challenges to adoption, right, which kind of dovetailed into the tricks for helping that, is integration, right, with other tools, right? I think a lot of customers get frustrated when they first deploy a catalog. They think it's going to magically do everything, and then they realize, oh wait, all I can do is search metadata, or oh wait, I still need a human to manually enter all the curation to actually find it useful. I think that's like the first part. What we see is usually like that's where like the first time the air kind of gets let out of the balloon, and you lose some steam in the adoption. And what happens is the user stops coming back the next time, right? We hear this a lot with, like my previous life, my previous company, which is a pure data catalog company. I hear this from other customers with pure data catalogs is, you bought 1,400 licenses and only 14 people are actually going to use it. And all the 14 of them have the title data stewards, right? And that's where I think, it's not to be, it's a thing to be not to be taken too lightly. The integration is really important, because when people discover, they don't want to just read about the metadata. Sure, that's helpful. That's the first part, right? But the next thing they want to do is, well, how quickly can I see? How quickly can I see what the data looks like? How quickly can I see that? And so some of the tricks that we've come up with is give the users as much of a warm start as much as possible. So for example, even going to the point of, like, when you've looked for something, quickly suggesting, by the way, here are the other questions that you can also answer that's similar to what you just asked. That makes it kind of interesting for some users, kind of go, oh, it's kind of like a search. We search for something like, did you mean this? Or what about this? Or other users have searched for this. It kind of helps the user, kind of gets them more curious to further explore, and then they stay in the catalog longer, right? That's one. The next thing we found is, ultimately for business users, they're very visual people, right? As much as they like searching for things, like, they want to see charts, they want to see pictures and graphics. And so if you can quickly generate a visualization of what that data, what that question they're looking for, and instantly show it to them in a matter of seconds, that keeps the engagement going much longer. It may not need to be like the final output, but it lets them know that they're on the right path, right? Or not, they need to search for something else, right? And so these are some of the things that we found, is that, if you can reduce the wait time for that user to have to go wait for someone else, to have to go in and out of a different tool, compress that wait time and give them kind of, little nuggets that getting them further along the journey of completion, it actually really goes a long way, right? And it's one of the things that we've also learned, maybe not as a trick, but just as a painful lesson learned, is that nobody wants to start out with a blank sheet of paper, right? Meaning, like, you can catalog everything. Hey, I have all the table names, columns, every table. But like a lot of times business users get intimidated, like, why, I don't know what to ask. I'm not really sure where to get started. And so these prompts and these hints of, hey, based on what we have, based on what your role, here's something that's interesting you might want to look at, right? And this is where the AI comes in. That's really powerful, is automatically suggesting relevant things that people want to look for and search for. So those are some of the tricks that we found that kind of gives that first gentle nudge, and then keeps the user much more engaged, right? Because if people aren't engaged, if they don't explore, if they don't tag, if they don't annotate, if they don't do the crowdsourcing, interactions, then the catalog kind of doesn't go too far, right?
Yeah, oh, those are great. Now, I thought you were going to say, Casey, data virtualization. You were one of the first catalogs to offer that, right?
Yeah.
And it so happens, as I mentioned earlier, that we have the three vendors sponsoring this event who have all launched data virtualization capabilities. So, Louis, I want to ask you, isn't that a trick to get user adoption? And how are you leveraging data virtualization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks for the setup there. I think that what data virtualization obviously offers is you're not just sort of able to find the thing, but then use it at the end of the day. And the analogy I always end up using, and it's a little dated, is sort of, if I went to a library and was able to access the Dewey Decimal cards, but not get the book out, that sort of limits my functionality and the use of the actual institution, right? And I think that you mentioned right off the top in your keynote, difference between data dictionaries and data catalogs. And we've always just said that data should exist within the catalog. Now, the problem with that is, of course, you then need to consider governance as core and role-based access controls as core. But both what Casey and Brian have been talking about is sort of, if you know the persona types who are going to benefit from your catalog, from data producers to data managers to data consumers, you can cater the tool to each of those different types, right? And I think that when it comes to adoption, which is the question that you're kind of asking here, is you need to know that each of those different types of people are going to want a different thing at the end of the day. And for a data producer, they might need to know where your API docs are and then go and figure it out for themselves. For a business user or someone who wants to consume the data, they're going to need to be shown the art of the possible. And I think that that's where you need to do some education. Your UI needs to be immaculate, because it needs to be an app that they want to log into every day. And it needs to provide them with suggestions, recommendations, quality controls that they know that the data they're using they can trust. All that stuff that just sort of gives people pause before they want to start adopting new technology, that should all be erased, both through the sort of functionality and the interface of the tool itself. I think what you said, Casey, was sort of giving them a warm start and really providing different pathways for the different groups who are coming into the catalog. Obviously, they all need to be sort of spoken for when you are giving them access to the technology. It needs to be robust enough as a tech tool to have the APIs so that they can still use it the way that they're used to using a metadata management tool. But then for the more consumers, they need to have it be very sort of familiar and intuitive so that they can get out of it as much as they want. And I think that the secret sauce for us is not just the documentation being, immaculate, not just that the UI needs to be really intuitive, but also like the human touch of just going and talking to people and finding out what their problems are and sitting on campus with them and taking them out to lunch and talking to them. That's the business adoption that I think that a lot of people aren't focusing on, because traditionally these things have been so much more focused on that IT user persona who maybe doesn't need to be sort of have that chat about what are your goals, what are your strategic priorities, what are your digital transformation strategy over the next 10 years, because that's really the thing that we're hoping to unlock.
That's really interesting. The human touch is still very important, even in the world of digital data catalogs. So, Brian, I want to ask you a question before we go to the rapid fire rounds.
Sure.
Do you want to add any tips for getting people started or talk about your query capabilities?
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned virtualization, and like you said, that's something that we think is really important, has been built in kind of from the foundation of the company. A lot of times we have to kind of understand the use case, right? A lot of folks are really still at the point of their journey where they want to focus on metadata, and that's okay. You need to be able to have a fully functioning catalog that is purely metadata. But to get into kind of any of the deeper use cases, and really, certainly as we're moving into more of an AI powered world, to really be able to use your catalog well in an AI world, you need to be able to virtualize through, use that metadata as a roadmap to understand what data exists, what does it actually mean, and how can I get to it. When you think about tricks for getting people to adopt the catalog, our adoption methodology is really, we think of it, we talk about a lot being like a T-shaped approach, right? Do you go breadth first or depth first? Well, it's a little bit of both, right? We go in like, well, what are your obviously most important data assets that are going to have the broadest approach? Your data warehouses, key SaaS systems, key BI tools, right? Those are the things that were like the obvious, 4 or 5 things that are going to have the broadest appeal. And then from there we zero in, okay, now let's go to one specific use case. What is one business question that you can't answer today? What's one business problem that would be, of massive value to you to solve? And let's drill deep on that. And that's going to leverage that kind of initial breadth of, look, my catalog's populated with lots of things. It's populated with whatever my starting point of my business glossary, my taxonomy, whatever logical assets I have. But now I'm going to drive through and say, now what else do we need to bring into this catalog to solve this one use case? And what you find then is that if you start stacking like the long tail of those use cases that stack up, each get easier and easier and easier until the point where it's like now you have a truly fully discoverable data catalog where each new use case is just completely self-serviceable, because you've built it on the foundation of connecting up data sources in their kind of priority order as they and linking them together and connecting them in a way that was actually used to solve real world use cases.
Okay, great. Are you guys ready for the rapid fire round?
Let's do it.
All right. So, and I'm not going to call on anyone. So just jump in if you have an answer. Keep your answers short, 30 seconds. First question, what will be the biggest change in the data catalog market in the next 18 to 24 months?
It's got to be data virtualization, I think. I mean, you're talking to 3 companies that all do it already, but I think that everyone who doesn't is going to find themselves falling way behind. And before Casey can jump in and say it, I think generative AI is going to be a big one too, especially for some of that business metadata.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I like to say data access, right? I think data virtualization is a type of data access, but I think it's people are going to be looking for an incorporation of both metadata and data access to have a true, end-to-end discovery experience. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. And then the generative AI is definitely going to complete the journey, right? Where that chatbot experience. So instead of looking for data or retrieving for data, it's really retrieving answers. So I think that's going to be the big, profound change, in that it's going to get us a completeness of the workflow for data catalogs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna, double down again on what they both just said. Maybe I think the way I refine it a little bit is like, if you look to my breakout session, like the theme of my breakout session is really, two phases of how AI are shaping data catalog. Phase one is going to be, how can we use AI to do better cataloging and governance? Phase two is going to be how cataloged and governed data is going to help us do better AI, and it really just relates to everything Lewis and Casey just said, which is that right now I think we're in a phase of using these tools to improve our tools, to improve our platforms, and that's really useful, and it's immediately reachable today. But what comes just on the other end of it, which requires virtualization and a solid catalog, is how do I actually use the fact that I understand my data, I've managed my data, I've appropriately connected up my data with a roadmap that really understands what it means to be able to build real AI powered solutions using generative AI.
Excellent. So in the audience, please come up with questions if you haven't already, because we're going to take them after this next rapid fire round. Okay. Kevin, maybe you can queue up some questions from the audience. But last rapid fire question for all of you, and jump right in again. What is the single biggest differentiator of your product? Because obviously we want people to go into your innovation hub, go to your breakout sessions, learn more about your product. So this is kind of a way to tee up those activities later on in the event. So who wants to jump in first?
I'll go. It's really the end-to-end experience. You literally ask a question, natural language, and we'll go all the way through from discovery of data, assembling the data, the query, and the visualization, and then the whole answer, right? Literally in a matter of minutes, because we think that's the most naturally intuitive way business users want to interact. So I feel like you get a complete experience, and then being able to integrate with all the different tools and BI tools as well. So users don't have to leave Prometheum to be able to stay inside and be able to iterate and fine tune their answers. I think that end-to-end experience is our biggest differentiation.
I can jump in. You kind of set it up front when you introduced me, Wayne. I'll go back to that. Our knowledge graph architecture, ultimately, we don't think of data catalog as a means to an end. Data catalog is a tool to bring together everything that is known about data. What you really want to do is then connect that up live to the data itself and turn that into something that both humans and AI can interact with very naturally, based on an understanding. All the aims that Casey just outlined are where everyone's trying to get to, and I think we think our biggest differentiator is the fact that from the core of the technology, from the beginning of the company, we're really building out a semantic knowledge graph, and the data catalog is a step along that journey that everyone has to take.
Yeah, I think that those are great, and we're going to be breaking down in a lot of our sort of features and the way that they differentiate themselves in our breakout session. I highly recommend everyone join it. But I actually want to go back to something Wayne said in his keynote about company heritage, and maybe take a bit of a different spin at this answer, which is that our company built a data catalog because we needed a data catalog when we started building and distributing data products about 10 years ago. And when you live inside that muck, when you know exactly what it's like to have these complex data pipelines and issues of data health and how to disseminate it and do so securely and do it in a sort of role-based access control way, I think that term dog fooding comes up a lot. We've lived this experience, and because we've lived it, we've now been able to create a software that can help other people sort of follow in that path. And I think that experience and that history is one of our greatest assets.
Terrific. Well, thanks for all that. Very brief synopsis of your own products. I rarely do you get vendors talk for just 30 seconds. But I think, less is more. So let's turn to the audience questions. Kevin, what do you have for us?
Okay, great. We've had some great dialogues here. I think, it's interesting because, Wayne, this reinforced a lot of your questions. There was a fair amount of commentary about the need for business usability, the need to appeal to business users. And I think that you did touch on that a fair amount. There's a perspective here from Priya Sarathy, and I can read it. I think advanced data scientists need to be able to access the data catalogs, and they're providing requirements for data management teams. So I wanted to just invite perspective on the role of data scientists in all this. we talked about AI as a transformative element of how you manage data. There's also data science and AI consuming what's in catalogs, and would invite perspective on that and the role of data scientists.
Yeah, I've always seen them as just another persona, right? Data analysts, data engineers, data stewards, business analysts that can benefit because if you think about what most data scientists do, they build models, right? And if they can't get to the right data or the accurate data to build their models, then guess what? The model's going to get delayed. The model's not going to retrieve accurate data. And so I've always been a big champion of that, and definitely encourage customers we talk to always get their data scientist team involved. It is a norm, though. I will say that a lot of times they sort of get left out of the traditional thinking, and so most people just kind of think, "Hey, just give them their notebooks and they'll be fine." And again, it's like, well, sure, but like you're now expecting this poor guy or gal to like know which data sets are good, where to go find them, but so I think organizationally that probably needs to start changing. But yes, I definitely agree that big fan that data scientists definitely should also have the same access to data catalogs.
I think can I jump in as well?
Sure.
I'm going to, so it doesn't matter. I think that one of the things that we've sort of noticed in the past 10 years is that data scientists have often been used as sort of the problem when it comes to a data catalog statement. I think that's completely unfair. They've been sort of said, 80% of a data scientist's time is spent, doing whatever. And I don't think that that's fair. Data scientists have inherited a lot of complex tech and are really, really good at their jobs and also know the tools that they want to work with. I think you get into trouble when it comes to the adoption angle for data scientists because they know exactly what they need to do and their problems are not the same as a data analyst. And I think that when we conflate all those persona types, we start to have issues with adoption. Because with a data scientist, you can't go into a data scientist and say, don't use your pandas data frame. Don't use the things that you've been learning to use for a long time. Just make their lives slightly easier. You don't need to completely upend their stack. I think that a data catalog is especially impactful for people who really don't have any access to data and need to sort of break through. I wouldn't say put data scientists in that group. So the worst thing you can do is try to upend or make their lives more difficult.
One real quick note, it's mostly kind of reinforcing some of what Casey and Lewis just said. I think one of the areas we see a lot when we talk with data science teams about how the catalog helps them, going back to that 80% of their time spent just doing cleaning and kind of data janitorial work. How I look at that is that's often the work that data scientists do end up doing that they'd really rather not do. And that's where, the catalog often provides the most value to a data science team by basically offloading work that they'd rather not do. And, the data scientists tend to be working in their workbooks, in their data frames. They end up doing a lot of point data curation, and they're usually, they're data people. They're actually quite good at it. They often don't see the value of a catalog. It's like, why do I need all this? I'll just go look at the database schema and I'll figure out what it means, and I'll frame up my frames and I'll go do my work. And the problem is that knowledge is now siloed into that workbook, and it helped them solve that problem, but no one else benefits from that. So what we try to get data science teams involved is to say, look, you're doing a lot of data curation every day. If you do it over here in the catalog, then other people can actually pick up where you left off and use the knowledge about what that data means and how it can be used. And you don't have to go hold their hand as the person who, when somebody else comes along and says, how could I go use this data? Oh, go ask Bob. He figured it out for this other project. So I think I mostly agree with a lot of what Lewis said, but when we try to engage, data science teams, that's really the angle that we take with them is, let's capture your knowledge and make it reusable by other people so that you don't have to redo that work 100 times, so you can focus on real data science.
That's a great point. It's all about tribal knowledge, and data scientists have more of it than anybody else.
Yeah, great stuff. So we've got a couple questions here about generative AI, the hot topic of the year. How will generative AI suggested curation, like a description for a business term, be efficient if it has to be reviewed or approved by the owner of a given domain? Great question. Casey, I loved your perspective on getting domain specific. I think that's the future of language models, because to really solve hard problems, you need to train on curated domain specific inputs. But to this specific question, do you have thoughts on that? You obviously need a human in the loop on some of these things.
Well, I mean, I think you should have a human in the loop, right? Because, like Wayne said, like there's still always going to be tribal knowledge, and it's never just domain or vertical specific. It's always company specific, and sometimes even organizational specific. I've found, and so while generative AI can be pretty good at automatically generating that, I don't think it's a bad thing to say that you still want a human being to just check and make sure that yes, this is 100% accurate and relevant for us. But I think the key is if you just look at the scale and the speed at which generative AI can do it versus a human, it's not even close, right? And having generative say go pound through these 50,000 columns and give me the human definitions, and great, I'll see you in 3 minutes, and it's done. There is no way a human being can do that, right? So it gives you that quick warm start to begin with, which it's always a lot easier to edit something that's already been done than to start, right? So I think that's where I think it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing that generative AI can automate this, give you some place to start off with, give you something to search for, give you something to consume, and then have the human curate it over time to make it better.
Yeah. It's really important to think about, like, that approval isn't necessarily binary, right? It's not here, I generate all these things, now I have to approve them. It really comes down to what's it being used for. Like 50,000 automatically generated descriptions, even if a lot of them are wrong, still greatly enhances the use case of help me understand what's in this catalog and search for it better. But I need to know when I'm landed on a particular page, hey, this was generated by an AI and was not verified by a human. So if you're going to use this to report to the SEC, you might want to check twice before you end up in hot water. Being transparent about where it came from and how much curation has gone on is what's really important.
Great point.
That makes sense. It's okay. So another one here related to generative AI. Would natural language search capability replace generative AI-based natural language search capability replace technical search and discovery, or would it be complementary within the data catalog?
Okay, so this is the last question. We only have 2 minutes left. So
all right, thank you. We'll make it a speed round question.
I think it's totally complementary. I think it comes down to how the user is interacting with the catalog, right? If the user wants to just purely search for technical metadata, the catalog should fully support that, and the user should be able to do that. If the user wants to phrase it in the form of a question, great, then they can actually do that with NLP.
Awesome. Okay. An answer for anyone else, or should we wrap up?
10 seconds. Totally agree. I mean, if you look at my breakout session, I'm going to talk about some of the things we're doing with natural language search, and I think the synergy is really obvious. You use the natural language to tap into the faceting and the the kind of structural understanding of the data that already exists. These two things go back and forth. It's not either or.
Yeah, I think it needs to be flexible. You need to be able to provide people with the ability to search technical, structural, administrative, and descriptive metadata, as well as any sort of natural language version.
Fantastic.